So for this, what we're going to do is we're going to look at the appendicular skeleton. Now, the appendicular skeleton, remember, is composed of the bones of the limbs and their girdle. So that's your arms and legs, and then the bones that we use to attach those to the main body trunk. So that's going to be things like your clavicle and scapula, as well as your hip bones or your os coxae. Okay. Now, we're going to see lots of bones, but we're also going to see a lot of structures. For every bone, there's going to be anywhere from 3 to 5 little structures, maybe a couple more than that you're going to need to know. So let's just kind of refresh our memory on what some of these are. Some of the major ones that we're going to see are condyles and heads. So condyles are the articulating surfaces, so where bones are going to meet other bones. It has to be smooth so that things move nice and smoothly. We don't have any hiccups. We have nice full range of motion that are nice and even and smooth. Okay, so those are going to be condyles. We're also going to see heads on some of these bones. Okay, these are going to be prominent rounded epiphyses. Remember, the epiphysis is the portion of the bone that kind of opens up, so it's the wide portion of the bone. This gives us a lot of surface area. Well, if we have a prominent, so a large area with a lot of surface, and then we round it and it makes it nice and smooth, this means we have a great way of getting a good, strong attachment that will have a big range of motion. Okay, so we are going to see heads on a lot of these bones. So here's the head of the femur, for instance. Here's the head of the humerus. We're also going to see some fossa. So these are kind of depressions. We're not really going to see many processes on these, maybe a couple of processes. So remember, a process is a bony prominence, so a bony protrusion. But we are going to see things like tubercles and tubercles and tuberosities. These are going to be important because these are round projections of bone where we can attach muscles to them. Okay, so these are going to be very important for us attaching muscles. So whenever you see a tuberosity, the question you need to be asking yourself is like, okay, what is attaching here? And sometimes it'll actually tell you, it'll be part of the name. For instance, this tuberosity here on the humerus is the deltoid tuberosity. So it tells you that the deltoid is what is going to be attaching there. So just kind of refresh your memory on all of those things. Now, a couple of things that we need to keep in mind here is that the upper and lower limbs are going to be a little different. This is because they are subject to different forces. We stand on our lower limbs, they thus have to be a lot heavier. So we're going to see the bones themselves are going to be a lot thicker. Not only are the bones going to be thicker, the joints are going to need to be more stable to help deal with that extra strength. We need the stability to make sure that we don't run into major problems. Okay. Now, so we're going to see more stable and thus have less range of motion in those bones. Whereas the upper limbs, because we aren't load bearing, this frees the arms up to have a little bit larger range of motion. Okay, so larger range of motion. So we are sacrificing a little bit of stability to gain extra mobility. We can do more and we can do things a little bit more quickly. Or a little bit more detail with our arms than we can with our legs. However, we lack a little bit of that stability, so it's a little bit easier for these bones to break and also to run into issues with those joints. Okay, now we're going to start with the arms. Starting with the arms, we have the clavicle and the scapula. This is not your collarbone and your shoulder blade. Okay, we need to make sure that we're using the word clavicle and scapula. Now, this is an anterior view. We're looking at it from the front. So here we have the clavicle up here in the front, and the scapula is going to be sitting kind of back here on the back of your shoulder. Okay. Now we can see this big bony protrusion right here. This is the coracoid process. Is going to be important so that we can have attachment sites for several muscles as well as ligaments and tendons. Okay, and it's all surrounding this little structure right here, which is the glenoid cavity. Okay, so this is where the head of the humerus is going to sit, right here in that little opening. Notice that it's nice and shallow. It being nice and shallow means that your shoulder joint is going to get to be very, very flexible. Now, you might wonder what the clavicle is actually doing here if the humerus is really only interacting with the scapula. Well, the clavicle is important as an attachment site for some of these muscles. It also is going to act as a brace and hold the scapula in place. So whenever you need to lift your arms up, well, those muscles are going to be pulling on both the clavicle and the scapula. And if the scapula isn't held in place, so if it isn't just kind of held, when those muscles contract, it's going to allow you to slide your scapula up even more, and your arm wouldn't actually lift yet. So we actually need our scapula to keep, or our clavicle to keep our scapula pressed down so that we can then lift our arm. Now, the clavicle has two major spots. We have the sternal end and the acromial end. So the sternal end is going to be medial, the acromial end is going to be lateral. You can actually feel this kind of anterior bend when you just kind of touch your own clavicle. You can kind of follow that arch as it kind of moves back towards the point of your shoulder here. The point of your shoulder, you'll notice, is also kind of nice and flat where your clavicle meets. So you can see that this little acromial side is nice and flat. If you flip it over and you look at the inferior side, so the bottom of the clavicle, you'll see that it's got some rough portions down here. So another way to tell top from bottom is actually just which one is smooth. The upper surface, the superior surface is going to be smooth, while the inferior surface will be nice and rough. The sternal end is also kind of flattened on the end, so you get this nice kind of big bulging kind of connection right here at the sternum. Now, the scapula, we have a few structures. Like I said before, we have the coracoid process. This means crow's beak, so it kind of looks like a little bird's beak. And then we have the acromion here. So we have the acromion back here. You notice we can see the glenoid cavity better. And then we have the anterior surface of the scapula. We can tell it's the anterior surface because, once again, it's nice and smooth. If you feel your own scapula, you'll feel this giant ridge on the back. The giant ridge you're feeling is the spine, okay? Now, we do have a couple of terms here. So we have this big notch running through here. We've also got a couple of depressions. So we have these supraspinous fossa, infraspinous, super meaning above, infra meaning below the spine, okay? Then we get into the bones of the upper limb. So here we have the humerus. This is going to be the main bone of the, or this is really the only bone of the upper limb, okay? So it's long, very, very strong. However, not nearly as strong as, say, the femur, and we'll kind of see the differences in their sizes here in just a moment. But we have this real shallow head up here at the top of the humerus. This is what's going to be used to slide into that glenoid cavity, being nice and shallow. Well, if you have a shallow glenoid cavity and you have a shallow head on the humerus, that means you get this massive range of motion. This is why we can do kind of ridiculous things with our arms, is because of how shallow that joint is. However, that also means that because that joint is fairly shallow, that it is actually more easily dislocated than something that is much more limited in its movement. For instance, I have actually dislocated both of my shoulders. We can also see a couple of structures on here. We have the greater and lesser tubercles, as well as a little groove that is going to be between those. Our intertubercular sulcus, so sulcus is just kind of a little shallow depression. We can also see our deltoid tuberosity here. The deltoid tuberosity is important because it's the attachment site for your deltoid muscle. So this is a fairly large attachment because this is a fairly large muscle group, because this is the main one that we're using to lift and elevate our arm. We also have a couple of fossas down here on the bottom towards the elbow, or at the elbow. So we have fossas we have the coronoid fossa and the radial fossa. The radial fossa is going to be a space for the head of the radius to go. The coronoid fossa is so named because it's a shallow depression that will fit the coronoid process on the ulna. Now we can also see the articular surfaces down here. Articular surfaces are going to be important. So here we have the capitulum and the trochlea. The capitulum is going to look like a little marble. It's very, very smooth, very, very round. This is because the head of the radius is also smooth and round. So it's going to kind of sit up flush against it. And this is going to allow that bone to both slide up and down as you flex and extend your forearm, but it will also allow that bone to pivot or twist on the capitulum as you are supinating and pronating your hand. Now, the posterior side, we can also see pretty easy because we can see, notice that the capitulum is gone. Your arm bends to the front. So we need all of the articular surface on the front. We don't have as much articular surface on the back because that's not the direction our arm really bends. Instead, we can see just the remainder of this trochlea, which is this kind of spool shape. You can also see this little groove running through that spool shape. That's actually going to keep the ulna on track. It's got basically like a little inverted groove itself, which is going to kind of slide along that trochlea, and it's going to help make sure that your arm really only moves front to back. Okay, this is what's going to help keep things nice and strong. So both of these are right. The way that you're going to tell that these are right bones versus left bones is first by identifying whether or not you can identifying front to back of the bone, and then top and bottom of the bone. So top and bottom is pretty easy to tell. We know the head has to face the shoulder, so we know that that's the top. Now, how do we tell front from back? Well, like I said before, the front has the capitulum, the back does not. So like, okay, I know I'm looking at this bone from the back, and here's the head, so here's the top. Well, I see the head is pointing this way, right? So that means the shoulder has to be this way, and kind of has to point back, which means this can only be the right humerus. Then we have the radius and the ulna. So we have the radius here, radius like something like a circle has a radius. That's kind of the easiest way to remember that. And this one has the head, which is going to basically look like a little circle. It's nice and round, once again, allowing it to kind of twist. There's also a little notch cut out of the ulna here where the radius is going to fit. So this is going to be our radial notch. Then here we have the ulna. The ulna is going to be pretty easy to identify also because it has this big U shape on the end. So the end of the bone is basically going to look like this, where you see this kind of big U shape. That U shape kind of clicks onto the trochlea of the humerus. So we have the ulna, which is the one with this big U on the end, and then we have the radius, which can spin on its radius. Now, we can see a couple of tuberosities here. These are going to be important attachment sites for muscles. We can also see the head of the ulna down here and our styloid processes, which are these little bony processes at the very, very ends of the bones, the distal ends of the bones. We can actually feel these processes on our hand. So if you kind of reach below your hand just a little bit, you'll actually feel a big bony knot on the back of your wrist. That big bump on the back of your wrist is going to be the styloid process of the ulna, because the ulna is going to be our medial bone. The lateral bone is going to be the radius. A good way of remembering this is the radius is going to be where your thumb is, okay? So in an anatomical position, it's going to have the radius be lateral. Now, you can actually feel that styloid process is a little bit more anterior, or a little bit more, I guess, medial. And that's going to be this big bump right here on the kind of side of your wrist. Now, importantly here, once we have these bones put together, you can actually learn about pronation and supination by looking at the bones, okay? Or we can use these bones to see this kind of strange process. Now, pronation means if you basically start with your palm up on the table and then rotate it where your palm is now facing down while keeping your elbow in place. If you do that, that is going from pronated to supinated. So supinated, so pronation is going to be bringing your hand over. Pronation would be rotating it back, okay? So supine is going to be with your palm facing up in anatomical position. But when you do this, when you pronate your hand, you're basically flipping your thumb over to the other side. And we can see that the bones form this little X right here. So they cross over. To allow that to happen, the radius has to be able to spin. That's why the radius has that kind of flat part on the end. Now, we also have the bones of the hand. So after the radius and the ulna, we can see the radius is kind of down here on the thumb side. The ulna is over here on the pinky side. We can see that we get into the wrist. So the bones of the wrist, we're not worried terribly about you learning all of the bones of the wrist. The couple that I do want you to know are going to be scaphoid and lunate. That's because the scaphoid is going to be what articulates with the radius, and the lunate is going to be what articulates with the ulna. I'll repeat that. The scaphoid articulates with the radius, the lunate articulates with the ulna. Those are the only two of the carpals that I really need you to know, okay? So the carpals are the bones of the wrist, and then after the carpals, we get into the metacarpals, so the middle carpals. This is where we get into the bones of the fleshy bits of your hand. So we have the bones of the wrist are these little blocks down here, and then we get into more long bones. So these are the bones of the hand. These are the metacarpals. And then we get into the bones of the digits. These are the phalanges. Now the phalanges we're going to break down into proximal, middle, and distal. Proximal is the closest, middle is the one between, and then we have the distal, which is the one following that. All right, that is the upper limbs. Now the lower limbs are very, very different. This is because we have to deal with massive amounts of force. Okay, because we are dealing with such large amount of force, everything has to be bigger and heavier and also more stable. So we need it to be stronger and more stable. Now we have three primary bones that are going to make up each of our what we call os coxae, or our hip bones. Okay, these are the ilium, the ischium, and the pubis. The ilium is the one that you're going to be touching when you kind of put your hands on your hip. So you're touching what's called the iliac crest. That's this big ridge right here. So that is the top of your hips. And then you have the ischium, which is where you sit. Okay, so the ischium is basically going to be the back of the hip bone, the back and lower portion of the hip bone. So like I said, that's where you sit. And you can actually see this tuberosity right here, the ischial tuberosity, which is actually where you're going to be sitting. And then here we have the pubis. So the pubis is going to be the anterior bone moving up through here. So this is your pubic bone right here. Now, the two os coxae are going to meet one another at our pubic symphysis. Now, the pubic symphysis is under a fair bit of stress because every time we move our legs, it's going to cause these hip bones to kind of shift just a little bit, which means they're going to put some stress on that pubic symphysis. So this is actually going to be made out of fiber cartilage. Now, the inner space here has to be smooth enough to support pelvic organs, not puncture them or anything like that. So we have this nice smooth surface on the inside. And then the outside is going to have lots of muscle attachments, including muscle attachments for some incredibly strong muscle groups, whether it's your gluteal muscles or your thigh muscles are all going to have attachment sites here on these hip bones. Now we can also see our condylar surface of the hip bone here, and this is called the acetabulum. This is going to be very important because this is basically where the head of the femur is going to sit. It has to be very smooth, so we have this nice full bit of articulation. Now this is helped out and made even smoother, and here our lunate surface, lunate because it looks kind of like a moon. So here we see that ischial tuberosity I was talking about. Here's our ischial spine. Once again, very important attachment site for muscles. We have notches right here for some of our nerves to pass through, things like that. Okay. Here we can see this ear-shaped structure. This is the auricular surface. This is actually the portion of the hip bone of the ilium that will actually meet with and fuse to the sacrum. Not fuse to so much as be held in place with really strong ligaments. So where your hip will actually tie itself to the sacrum and be held in place as strong as we can possibly make it. Now, these three bones are fused together, once again, for strength. Our gluteal muscles and our leg muscles are the strongest muscles we have, makes sense since we can do things like run and jump. So we have to have really strong attachment sites, which means this bone's under a heck of a lot of stress. So it has to be quite large. Now, there are two big divisions here, two big things that we can see. These are differences, rather. We have male and female pelvises are going to be slightly different. Now, one thing I want y'all to keep in mind here is that there's lots of variance. Okay, there's lots of variance across the spectrum. There will be males that will have more openings, males that have a smaller or a larger angle here between the pubic bones. So there will be, it's not super cut and dry where it's like this is absolutely male, this is absolutely female all the time. And the same thing is going to be true for female pelvises. Some female pelvises will be positioned slightly more vertically, or the opening will be slightly smaller than others. So tons of variance here. So don't think that it's just incredibly cut and dry. There will be some amount of intuition, I guess, that has to play into this, or some amount of putting all the pieces together if someone were, say, just trying to identify sex based off of the skeleton. There are other characteristics to be looking at as well. Okay. However, we can see some differences. One of the biggest of these is that the bones themselves are going to be positioned wider and lower in females rather than in males. This is because this is going to reposition those ischial spines and make a slightly larger opening here. This is also going to help give us a larger pelvic inlet and a larger pelvic outlet, which means we have a larger opening for childbirth so that it's easier to pass the infant through this space than it is in a male. Okay. The same thing goes with our pubic arch right here. Notice that it's nice and wide in the female pelvis and a little bit narrower in the males. Males, the bones are positioned more vertically because we don't need them to be as open, because we don't have to worry about passing a child through them. This also allows the muscles themselves to have straighter lines, which means they're going to be a little bit more efficient. And this will help the male pelvis be a little bit stronger for that. But there's plenty more here to read if you are so inclined. But now we get into the bones of the lower leg. So here we have the femur. So notice big, huge, heavy bone, looks like a weapon. Like if you all ever watch Flintstones, this is kind of the main bone that you would be using for something like that. Very, very large, very, very heavy. We have the head up here. You'll also see this special little structure called the fovea right here. This is going to be attachment site for the ligament of the femur, which will kind of help hold things in place. You'll also notice that the head here is very, very deep. So the interaction between the head of the femur and the acetabulum is a very deep connection. This is going to help make sure that it is very, very strong, very, very stable, while still giving us a fair bit of range of motion. It's still a ball and socket joint, so we still have a big range of motion. However, we have a smaller range of motion than we have in the shoulder. In exchange, though, we get massive amounts of strength and stability. Dislocating hips is not something that happens very often. It's usually only going to happen in elderly folks or in really traumatic car crashes and stuff like that. It has happened a few times in sporting events, but even then it's fairly rare. One big famous case of that would actually be with Bo Jackson. He was a football and baseball player in the, I want to say 90s. And that's actually what ended his career, is a dislocation of his hip. Now we also have attachment sites for muscles. We have the greater and lesser trochanters. Notice this huge arch right here and this big spine. Okay, these are attachment sites for muscles. If you see that large of an attachment site for muscles, that should tell you the type of strength that those muscles are going to be applying to the bone. If the bone, we have to grow that much bone to help deal with the strength, those muscles have to be very, very strong. This is actually where your gluteal muscles will be attaching. Then we have this big line that's going to be going down the back of the leg. And then we get to the knee. Now, the knee, we have massive amounts of articular surface. So all this white that you see right here is very, very smooth, so that we have good, smooth articular surfaces with the tibia, which is the load-bearing bone of the lower leg. So we're able to spread all that force out over as much area as we possibly can. So these are our condyles. We have one on the lateral side, one on the medial side. If you look for the head, we know the head has to be our medial side. So if we follow this, so here down, well, that has to be then the medial, which makes this the lateral condyle. Now, the big bumps you see on either side on these epiphyses, these are the epicondyles. We have a medial epicondyle and a lateral epicondyle. These are important attachment sites for ligaments that are going to help support and protect the knee joint. Then we have the kneecap. The kneecap is kind of fun. It basically is going to be this kind of seed-shaped bone where we have this smooth surface on the posterior side. So the one faces the inside of your knee needs to be smooth so that we get this nice, smooth gliding motion. It also helps protect that knee joint. The tendons of your quadriceps are actually going to pass through and around your kneecap, so around your patella. So it's just going to kind of be suspended there. But this is basically going to help things move nice and smooth while also protecting the inside of the knee joint. Your knee joint is very, very important. So this helps us protect it. All right, now we get into the lower leg. So the lower leg is going to be important because, well, this is how we walk, right? So we have this large bone right here that's kind of shaped roughly like a T. So T for tibia, okay? The tibia has this big bump on the front. This is the tibial tuberosity. This is where that quadriceps femoris tendon that we were just talking about is going to attach. So you can actually feel this as the big bump on the front, just below your knee. So the front of your leg, just below your knee. So that is your tibial tuberosity. So that's where your quadriceps femoris is going to attach. Then you have your shin bone here, which you would call the anterior border. It's this nice sharp edge on the front of your leg. Then we go down here and we widen the bone back out. So once again, we can spread all that force out. And we're going to have the inferior articular surface. This will articulate with the talus of the carpals. So T for tibia, T for talus, okay? Now on the inside of the bone, we have the medial malleolus. This one should be fairly easy to identify. It's a big point off of the bottom of the bone. Now that we know that, this always has to face medially. It does not face laterally. We have a lateral malleolus, but it's on a different bone. Okay, so the medial malleolus here is part of our tibia. Now, if we look at the back of the tibia, so the tibia also has a slight bit of arch to it. If we look at the back of the tibia, we can see this little articular facet that will hold the head of the fibula. Now, I will go ahead and tell you right now about one of my pet peeves. if you are writing on an exam and I point at this bone and I say, what bone is this? And you say it is a fibia or a tibula, it is just wrong. It is not partial credit. It's not a misspelling. It is just wrong. Okay. That's because I can't tell whenever you do that if you are trying to say tibia or if you're trying to say fibula. So I just assume that what you're saying is wrong. Okay. So we need to make sure that we learn the spellings here. So tibia, T-I-B-I-A, fibula, F-I-B-U-L-A. So we have the tibia and then we have the non-load bearing bone of the lower leg. This is your fibula. Now the fibula is basically here as a support structure. So it's not load bearing. It's just kind of there as an attachment site for muscles and to provide stability for the ankle. So nice and small. And we're going to have a lateral malleolus over here, which is going to kind of help hold your ankle in place or hold your foot in place at the ankle joint. Now we get into the tarsals. The tarsals, once again, I'm only going to have you know two particular tarsals. Those two particular tarsals are going to be the calcaneus, which is your heel bone, and then we have the talus, which is the top of the foot. So T for talus, T for top of foot, T for tibia. Okay, so the tibia is going to interact with our talus here as it faces up. The calcaneus, like I said, is your heel. Then we have the rest of the tarsals. Then we get into the bones of the foot. This is our metatarsals. Then we get into the bones of the digits. Once again, we have our phalanges. So we have proximal and distal phalanges, and we have middle phalanges in here too. Those middle phalanges and distal phalanges in your toes are particularly tiny. We can also see the arches in our feet. The arches are actually going to be fairly important. These are actually here to help support our feet and help us position load correctly across our feet. This is why arch supports or having arch support in our shoes is fairly important for us, especially with the way we walk, which we tend to walk heel toe. If you're not walking heel toe, the arch of your foot helps you reposition all of that weight. And we use the muscles in our feet to help us kind of maintain these arches because these are going to help keep our feet nice and stable and nice and strong. These also make sure that the blood vessels in our feet are not pinched. So that's actually another very important factor too. We have lots of muscles in here, lots of blood vessels. So those arches help make sure that the blood is going exactly where it's supposed to go and the nerves are going where they're supposed to go. So it helps keep pain at bay. If you've ever seen like an arch in a building or an arch in a bridge or something like that, that should illustrate the strength that those arches have. It's actually much stronger to have something with an arch than it is to have something that's nice and flat because it's really easy for that flat bit to sag. The arch already has that strength built into it, so it's much harder to cause that depression. And we have a couple of major arches here. We have the medial arch, the lateral arch. So this is the primary arch of your foot. And then we have the transverse arch, which is basically going to be this line that's underneath your tarsal bones or metatarsals, I guess. So kind of at the base of your foot. So that spot that feels really nice when people rub your feet, that's following this transverse arch. Okay, so that's going to be it for this chapter. That should be enough to get you all started. Whenever we come to class, we will be looking at all these things and labeling as many of these parts and pieces as we can. All right, see you soon.